This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, which is like sit down with people and just watch movies like this.
Yeah,
Just talk. Like honestly, like that sort of thing is so intriguing. Yeah. You can see the Klingon as
now. Watch. Why is the guy at the podium lectern there?
Yeah,
he's being uplit like this.
Yeah,
supposed to be now. You're never supposed to do that because it's okay there. It makes sense because the light's coming down
and it's bouncing back up.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying.
But he's lit from under here, which you're not ever supposed to do because it's cool lighting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But watch how pretty it is.
Yeah, but it makes sense, and that's so.
There's
crazy.
some beautiful, absolutely beautiful cinematography in this movie.
It's like they were really immersed in the world that they were in. It wasn't just like, how do we make the most perfect like frame? It's more like, we're going to light everything specifically for a like worldly reason. Like it makes sense that he's underlit because of that pool of light coming down from the top.
And that's the very best lighting.
That's so crazy.
The whole point of it.
Yeah.
The whole point of anything we do for this is to tell the stories.
Yeah.
And it matches the story.
Dude.
Anyway, sorry for the
No, don't apologize. That was great. Are you kidding?
Did we get that?
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, we're rolling. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's talking.
I actually wasn't even aware of that. That's funny.
The shotguns are on though, so that's funny. Awesome. Well, that's a really good intro. What's up, everybody? It's the Poorly Edited Podcast. It's the show where we put a spotlight on some of those creative minds we can find as best as a couple people in a very hot studio in the Lehigh Valley can do.
Not too bad.
I'm your host, Chandler Davis.
I'm Josh Brennan.
And we're here with a very special guest. You know what? I didn't J.B. Earl, who is a photographer, videographer, director of photography, gaffer, everything. You're an amazing filmmaker, and I'm very excited to be talking to you today. I also didn't ask you if you want to be introduced as J.B. Earl.
Yep. That's what most people know me as.
Hey, man, it's a good stage name, I'll be honest. You know, there's a few people that we, run with in this circle where we'll talk about them and it'll be like, which one do you mean? But that never happens with you because you just have such a unique stage name, or I guess just working name. I don't know what you'd call it.
It's actually the name I grew up with.
Really? That's lucky as hell. Yeah, that's...
grandfather's name was Joseph. My father's name was Boyd. And they couldn't decide, which one, so my parents used both.
Do you think that's a good strategy?
When I was young, it didn't work. Young, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Well. And then there was some number of years, I guess, around high school that I decided to go by Joe. So there are a number of people that know me as Joe, but mostly JB.
That makes sense.
I've been there.
It worked out.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Where it's like, some people are like, hey, JR. And I'm like, who? Because there was like a brief stint where I did that. Don't ever do that.
Yeah, don't ever decide halfway through.
Yeah.
I feel like it's good to go into the career path that you want and have decided on that, because he was like freelancing and he just did this thing where he told like half the people he worked with one name and then half a different name.
Yeah. If I'd done it on purpose, it would have been a great joke. But the problem was I didn't do it on purpose. I'm just an idiot. So I told like the people I was working with in news that my name's JR. Please call me JR. Like credit me as JR. I even said like credit me as JR. And then other people that I was working with like more in this circle, I was like, just call me Josh. I don't care how you credit me. And so like there's two different spheres and like neither one lines up for some reason.
There's no consistency.
And there's just no connection.
Which kind of defeats the purpose almost.
Pretty much. I'm just going to be known as that guy now.
Yeah.
Just like Anyway.
I did that. Occasionally I'll just say Joe because it's easier to explain.
Right.
It's just something that's quick and just Joe.
Well,
but then sometimes those things get bigger.
Exactly.
Involved in it. And it's like,
it goes beyond its scope.
Try to explain this now or what?
Yeah, like, hey, actually.
It's too late. I screwed it up.
Yeah, man. No, seriously. Great name. Great choice. You did a great job on that. No, we were just working with you on Purple Heart, and you were the director of photography on that project. I know you have a large background in studio photography and gaffing as well. I think that your brilliant in those positions, and I think that it was very cool to get to watch you work, especially on that most recent set. I think we had like occasionally been on the same set, like when we were filming things for like Daniel Roebuck or whatever. We had worked together a little bit, but to have gotten that much time like to work and watch your process and get to, you know, pick your brain a little bit was amazing. Thanks. And yeah, I think you're very a very talented filmmator, and so
okay, enough.
Hey man, listen, I know.
Keep it going. Come on.
I know how you are, man. You're a very chill dude, and I know you don't like to talk yourself up and everything like that. You know, I'm fine doing it for you. You know what I mean? Like,
great.
Like seriously, you deserve it. No, but I really am interested in talking about lighting, and I think I had said that like a year ago when we met, and I remember saying I wanted to talk about lighting with you on the show, and we like didn't get around to it very well, and now finally here we are. So I'm very excited. Honestly, at the top of that, I'd really love to know, what do you think of our lights? I mean, what do you think of our whole setup? I mean, it's pretty.
A lot of lights.
It's pretty. It's not where we want it to be, but
this is good for a situation like this where, you know, we're looking all over the place. It's the kind of thing you do for a, you know, studio lighting, maybe in a television studio, which is essentially what we're doing here. We've got multiple cameras, multiple people looking different directions. You kind of just have to fill everything in.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And you'll naturally get a key light that side. I'll naturally get a key light this side. And those sorts of things. So this is the right setup for this.
It's interesting you should say that, because that's something we ran into right away. Was like we would have like a fill on the hosts, and that would be also the key light for the guest. And there's even some like bouncing that happens too, where like it'll bounce around these walls and come back and almost act as like a ring light almost. And it's just interesting. And we never really, for me personally, I never really was somebody who would enjoy talking about lighting. I always just did it because I had to, because I like recording things and making movies, but you need light to do that. But when we first got into this studio and we had to really work around like the windows and natural lighting and have to be a bit more specific and intentional about how we lit things, I realized that it's actually really interesting. And even using this corner as a means of filling everything out and like where do we place the lights and stuff too was immediately fascinating to me. And then of course we started working on the Purple Heart, and I was able to ask you some questions about like the most efficient ways of like getting a certain shot in regards to like how to light it without it being too technical and not wasting time. So I'm realizing more and more that I'm more interested in that than I originally thought I was.
That's interesting. Some cinematographers don't do lighting, period. They rely on the gaffer to understand, and so they can just talk about a certain feel or a certain look they want, and the gaffer ends up doing what I think the DP's responsibility is for, you know, like really understanding how you want that light to be shaped or feel. And then other DPs like me, you know, because I've spent so much time lighting, I know I tend to dictate a little too much of how I want a certain setup to be, because I know exactly what it's going to give me.
I witnessed so many times where on set, because we were in the G&E department, so I mean, I witnessed so many times where you'd be talking to Michael Patrick Owen, our department head, and you'd be explaining a shot, but there didn't have to be this like middleman. There didn't have to be this weird miscommunication. You knew exactly what you wanted because you had the experience, because you know how it works so well that you know exactly what to ask for. You know how to communicate those things in a much more efficient and quick way than, you know, a DP that doesn't have that level of understing of it, you know?
And quick is also really important on set.
Exactly.
Very important.
Exactly.
And difficult.
Yes.
You know, everyone, you know how much work it is to make things happen. And then how much harder it is when something changes, you know, you didn't expect. You were hoping, the weather report said it'll be clear and sunny, and you know, it's not. And then you have continuity, you have to match the lighting, change your setups. That all goes into it. And you know, that's the technical end of it. Which is, I guess, kind of where I came from, because I've been doing commercial photography for so long, and which tends to be very technical. You know, there's aside from creating a certain look. There's also the efficiency. There's also the idea that commercial work, especially traditionally, not always now, but traditionally was very clean and specific and precise. I don't know what the words would be exactly. And things are a little different now, but
much more uniform.
Yes.
Had a lot more of a standard that you would be usually trying to match. Yeah.
You'd often, doing product work, you'd often, you have to make the background exactly even. When I started doing it, of course, you couldn't go and retouch. If the edges were dark, there was nothing you could do about it. Right. And, eventually there was a point where we did some weird things back in the day.
Yeah.
I remember doing a bunch of commercial shoots where there were not quite damaged, but things on the product that weren't good looking the right way. And we would shoot it and then make a work print, send it to the art director at an agency we'd be working with. The art director would airbrush it, the print, to fix the defects in the stuff, and then we would rephotograph it to send it and have it scanned to get to the press.
So they're like physically painting over that's interesting.
Well, that's where most of the terminology comes from.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to editing, editing in general, I think that's where a lot of the terms come from. It's whatever they physically would have done at the time to fix those things.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because you literally used to
cut the film. Yeah. It's so crazy. Wow.
Yeah. And dissolve, that was the thing we used to do. You'd have 2 slides. We used to do slide shows where you'd have projectors and dissolve units, and 2 projectors and a machine that would fade one out and bring the other one up, brighten the brightness, physical brightness, and you'd dissolve them together. Weird, and that's where it's all from. But anyway, that's where I learned everything, and especially because it's commercial. It's still kind of something I fight with, is trying to not perfect things so much.
Why?
Well, it doesn't have to be perfect.
It starts to look fake.
It starts to look fake, and then of course it eats up time. If you had to shoot, this on a white background for the client because the white background was the only way you could get the film clear enough to get another object to show through the back, whatever. It had to be white, and you had to spend your time metering every spot and making sure it didn't fall off a quarter stop or a third of a stop, whatever, up in the corners. And if it did, you had to change your lighting for it.
Wow.
So it eats up a lot of time, and it's, obviously now it's unnecessary because it's faster to do that in post. But it wasn't then. So unfortunately, those old habits die hard sometimes.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
So I've been fighting my tendency to overdo things that way.
Yeah.
Which I guess I've heard that's kind of a common thing from people who started doing commercial work and then moved to narrative. And, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I love it anyway. I love the technical part of it. Either way, it's like, how are we going to do that?
Yeah. So you talk about the technical. What is the opposite of the technical then when it comes to lighting? Because lighting, I think, is weird because it seems the more I learn about it, and I was very afraid and apprehensive of lighting when we would do it in college because it just seemed so confusing. And at the time, I was like, oh, well, I don't think I like lighting that much, so I probably don't have to know that much about how to do it. Awful idea. Very incorrect. But so the more that I learn about lighting, it seems like it almost feels all technical to a point. And it's like the more you realize it's technical, I think the stronger you become when it comes to lighting almost.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I think I know what you mean. It is, there's a lot that can go into lighting. There's just understanding the instruments themselves, different kinds of lights, different kinds of light sources, different kinds of modifiers, how they work, what they do, why you would choose one over the other, all those things. And then getting them to do what you want. There's a lot to unpack there when you look at it all at once. if you start looking at very specific things, it's actually really straightforward. Things like color temperature, things like softness of the light source. It's very straightforward once you get it that way. But when they all combine, and one thing affects the other thing, and you're talking about the white walls, that's one of the worst things. Any cinematographer will tell you or photographer for that matter, that's the very worst thing to get dropped into, is a situation where you have to deal with a white room.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything in a white room to control the light. The light just goes everywhere, it bounces everywhere. You can't shade it, you can't shape it, you can't control it and do what you want to with it, unless you want it to look that way.
Right. Exactly.
If you want the, I'm trying to think of some scenes. What's the movie? THX 1138.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
And you want that.
Yeah.
Of course, that's the opposite end. That's just as hard to do, to light it evenly so it's white everywhere. Yeah. Not too bright here, a little dark there. But it's. I forget where I was going with that. That was a tangent. White walls, controlling the light, that sort of thing. So, going from say a bunch of soft sources in a room that's white, and knowing why you can't control it and what you can do, like just that one thing, saying, okay, this is a soft source. What's going to happen with this thing? In this room, what's going to happen to it if I try to shape it? And of course, you very quickly find out you can't do that with a soft source, and where you have a lot of reflective surfaces. Yeah. Well, you can, but it's a lot harder. Yeah. So if you break down those things, and you've worked with the one issue that gave you trouble, and then you look at that and why did it give you trouble? Maybe it could be color temperature, same sort of thing. You were looking at these are by eye. To me, they look like cold daylight. Maybe they're 6,000 K, something like that. The window light, of course, this way looking. I'm thinking we're looking kind of north because I see direct sunlight on the trees out there. I mean, north-ish. So I'm seeing direct sunlight there, which is a lower color temperature. So, in my mind, the first thing I'm looking at here is, okay, we've got mixed color temperatures. We have different color temperatures in the lanterns.
Those are supposed to be off.
Yeah. I just realized that.
They're relatively dim compared to the main lighting here, so they're not going to affect us at all, unless we had something reflective here.
Right.
If we were wearing, if something was metallic here, you'd see the reflections of the different colors.
Like, for instance, if you put a bunch of glossy finished posters behind everyone, then
you might see a yellowish, and then if you're white balance to the higher color temperature, you'd see whitish, and then you'd see yellowish.
You'd see the contrast there as opposed to being like solid. That's interesting.
When you start looking at that one specific thing, it's a little more digestible.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Wow, we suck.
No, it's just like, there's a lot of stuff that I've taken a lot of interest in and that I've delved into a lot, but I don't know why. I just look at lighting as such a magical still to me, like your ability to eyeball what you just did seems to me, it's just like, I have no idea how I would even arrive at that point, in terms of expertise. And it's just still this mystical power, you know what I mean?
It's, I'll say it's fun. I mean, it's not really power. I look at light all the time. I'm always staring at it, just like that. When I walked in, I know what direction we're looking. I see where the sun's falling, and you look at the color contrast. I don't know if you can see from over there, but I can see some trees through that one little opening, and I see the low angle sunlight, and I'm comparing it to the color of the sky, which is it's a complementary color now, of course, and it'll get more intense. And what does that feel like? And why does it look like that? Besides the angle of the light against the trees and the color contrast, why does that feel a certain way? How, and And
are you talking about feel in terms of visual feel aesthetically? Okay.
Like evoking the emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea too. I didn't think about it that way. That I always think of it in terms of a feel, and it can be an emotional feel. You know, a warm sunlight effect.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
And and all those things have an effect. You know, which ultimately is what we're going toward, where we're headed with lighting to tell the story, to help tell a story in a film. So if you just watch, you know, all day long, all night long, everywhere you are, just look at the way the light's falling and what it looks like, and then how it feels. You know, how it feels to you emotionally, how it feels in terms of the visuals.
Wow.
I always say feel, and I'm talking mostly about visual, but that translates to how does it feel emotionally, which is what you use to tell a story then.
Yeah. So it's like behind that terminology, behind what emotion is being evoked by the light, there's a plethora of like technical experience to get to that emotion. It's this idea that like you almost have to learn the technical aspects of it.
That's fascinating.
To get to a certain emotion. Wow. Like instead of just like shooting film.
Well, that answers the opposite, because I asked you what the opposite of the technical is, and it's like, but that's what it is. Like you have to know the technical so deeply in order to really understand the inverse, which I guess is the emotional,
it's like
like visual.
Or hire a gaffer who knows how to do it.
Or hire a gaffer.
Yeah,
way quicker.
That, you know, that goes to the some DPs just don't know lighting.
Right.
Interesting.
And in that case, they have to get a gaffer who, you know, they can say, you know, we're looking for a really warm feel here. This scene, things change in this scene for the better, so we want to, you know, evoke that emotion with the lighting. You know, maybe we want it a little softer, maybe we want it warmer, and warmer can mean different things.
Like happy or actually physically warm.
Physically warm, warmer color temperature, warmer light. It can mean a lot of things. It can be a hard sunset light, where, you know, it's a hard sunset hit, but if it's hitting at just the right angle, it still gives you that warm feel.
I loved that shot that we did on the last day where it was supposed to be the beginning of the day and you were simulating sunlight streaming through the windows in that one of those last shots. I think it was like actually the last shot.
It was the last
few shots or whatever.
I think it's next to the last scene. And the reason I wanted to do that was because there is an emotional change in the film. That's when that character or lead character, he changes. You know, that's the next morning, and where he's made that decision. And so I wanted to have a lighting change. And the earlier scenes that take place in the same location are lit colder and, no, I shouldn't say cold, but they're softer, flat-ish kind of. Actually, that's not even true, relatively speaking.
Right. Yes. I was there. No. Was,
and so the idea there was to signify that change emotionally with the light, and have a fake sunset.
To have simulated, because I even had a moment where I was like, that doesn't, and then I like stepped back so I couldn't see the lights. And I was just looking at how the set was lit and how it actually looked, the results of it. And I was like, I really wouldn't know the difference. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it looks so correct. It looks so real.
That's great.
And that's also seemingly to me like a fascinating power to, because my brain is small. And like, when I see a shot like that, I'm like, oh, well, and the easiest way to accomplish that is to just be lucky enough to have that window be facing the sun when it rises and shoot it. But that's not how you should do that at all usually. And I never think about, when I see lighting in film especially, or not just film, but, you know, lighting in anything, video production, my brain does not often go to like, I always see the results of the lighting and I never think about how it was achieved. I always just think of the natural source, which is the whole point of it, is that you're simulating these things to seem as though they are natural sources oftentimes, and that naturally this lighting is, you know, I think in film, like naturally this is the light that's coming from this area on this set in this environment, and this is what it looks like. And I don't think about, I just think about the real life source that would come from, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
That means the DP and gaffer did and the key grip.
Exactly.
And all the grips and all the sparks, they all did their jobs, because it's supposed to feel right to you when you're watching a story. It's supposed to tell the story for you. And, if it looks artificial, of course,
you're going to
not doing its job.
Yeah.
So, and that's great. Biggest kick I get on set is when we're doing a scene and we're done, and some of the crew they'll walk outside or something, and they'll say, "Oh, I didn't know it was still light out," or I didn't know it was dark already.
You're like, yes.
And it's like it was completely believable. We're in here, and they thought the sun was out. I love that. It's just,
it's almost like an illusion. It's interesting. It's like you're convincing the audience that like what they're getting is like, it makes sense. And that's so fascinating to me. It's so crazy.
Yeah, that's the part I love is, creating those kinds of effects. And
like artificially simulating
and it's for technical reason. The main reason you do that, well, I can't say the main reason. I guess the two big reasons are the effect, the emotional effect, but also for continuity, because if you need a shot that takes place at sunset, it's really hard to do a scene, to do more than one take. Like you might get a shot off at those few minutes when the sun's at the right angle. Or you might plan your day and then the clouds roll in at sunset, or whatever. So even if you do manage to get one take, so you have to go for continuity all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes if it's a simple shot or simple scene, and you're not looking for any particularly radical effect, and it's just a matter of getting some light there. And sometimes you go through all that work and nothing, the light didn't change. You had your perfect north light the whole time. And so like all the work you put into doing the lighting that was only to give you lighting continuity.
Thank you, Allentown.
Was, I don't want to say wasted, but the reason you did it was so that you could just shoot and not have to worry about the light changing. Sometimes you get lucky and it doesn't change anyway, but you have to go through that effort, no matter what.
It's interesting you should say that, because it came up a little bit ago, and even you and I were talking at one point about this. There's something, I'm realizing this more and more the more that I work with other people that have been doing this for longer. There's almost like an element of, it's like a mixture of like needing control over your craft, over all the elements on set, but also being very flexible at the same time. And that's something I'm realizing, is that a lot of the stuff that like I've run into as someone who's really new in this field stemmed directly from, well, I didn't have control over the light. I allowed the sun to set, or I didn't have control over a camera because I don't know how to operate it properly. And it can go into a bunch of different areas of this, whether it's like actually visual or it's more of like a technical behind the scenes thing. But then there's also like, it's just fascinating. It's an observation that like people that are operating at the peak of what they're doing have like maximum control. Like they have everything accounted for. Like they're not having to worry about all those extraneous details that might not work in their favor. But then once they get to that point, then they're allowed to be very laid back, because if something happens, they're like, okay, well, we've got it handled. We can roll with the punches at that point. It's just fascinating. And I saw that happen on set a couple of times too, because there were things that went wrong, but at the same time, there were so many things leading up to that were under control that allowed you guys to fall back on like plan B or roll with the punches or whatever. It's just very interesting.
That's one of my favorite things that a lot of people I've worked with will have heard me say this many times. Is, I don't know who it was, like General Patton or somebody. Quote is, "No plan survives contact with the enemy." You may have heard me say that. And he wasn't saying there's no point in having a plan.
Right, exactly.
He was saying plan it as best you can.
Yes.
Knowing full well that as soon as you get into production,
plan's gone.
It's exactly.
But
you have
I love that quote too. I love that.
You have to have a starting point. Otherwise, your team doesn't. Like it's okay. What are we going to do?
Exactly.
And so things are going to change anyway. The weather's going to change. Cameras will break down. Wardrobe, any number of things. Sometimes you get planning a shot. Here's another one in that last scene. where I'd intended to carry that sunlight into the next room where our lead walks down the hallway into the next room. And we had a problem with a light that I was using, and we had to switch to a different light, which was a little bit bigger. And our G&E team rigged it. Yeah, you know exactly. And we couldn't get the camera in there because of all the other stuff. But by the time we had the camera set up for that first shot, I realized there's no way I'm going to be able to frame the shot and not give the lead a little bit of a haircut. We had to give him some room. And that light was going to be in the frame. And so it was like the last minute, I had to give up that one effect there, which I would have loved to have. But, you have to just deal with things. And then change the exposure. We put a light behind him instead, a little bit different. And it worked fine.
Yeah.
It's sometimes things aren't necessarily better or worse. They're just different. Even though you planned for this thing and you got that thing, sometimes they're happy accidents and it works out even better. And that's fun too. And it's just like,
yeah.
Then you say, yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the planning is critical for the control, which is, that's why a director will, do take after take. Right? It's got to be exactly this thing. We have to massage it and move it this way. That's why a production designer will, pick a slightly different shade of cloth or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing you do with camera work, with your framing. Is, it's going to be framed exactly to here, and that's it. I don't want to see that much more of the door frame or something.
Yeah.
Right? Or is it this or is it this? Like where's your frame? Because you're guiding the viewer to either look specifically at some, or sometimes you're misguiding the viewer to look at something instead of something else. So yeah, control. I think that's the case with every part of filmmaking.
Wow.
Exact. Yeah.
Well, when it comes to pre-planning for lighting, I know light plots exist, and I know there are programs that are very, very comprehensive when it comes to 3D modeling and simulating light, and you can simulate different lighting types and Kelvin and everything like that. I get that, but I mean, do you use any of those things? Like, how do you? Because lighting seems like a kind of weird thing to plan. Like, I'll be honest, we were just in a pre-production meeting before you came to shoot this, and I would love to plan lighting, but there's a lot we aren't sure about in the location because we haven't traveled there yet. And, it's kind of like, I don't know how else to approach planning for lighting as much as I know I need to, because I think lighting is I'm learning to be the biggest one of the biggest factors of what makes something look good, more than even a camera is.
Oh, by far.
By far. And so it's like, it's the most important thing, and I feel like I don't know how I can plan ahead that well.
Well, there's really no substitute for seeing a location, knowing what's there.
But even if you would see a location, right? And I know it helped you guys on Purple Heart, because I remember you guys talking about it. You would get somebody like, you already knew the lights, you already knew what you were going to account for or try to block out or whatever, and that was very helpful. But like, even if you can get to that point, I knew you were light plotting some stuff out, and I was there for when you were doing a little bit of that on the plot on the fly on the last day.
Was diagrammed.
Yeah. And so how does that just come from experience where you can draw up a light plot and like, because of the kind of light you're specifying here and the temperature and everything, you just know, and that helps you.
Some of it you just know, like you want a certain instrument because of the quality of the light. It's, certain hardness, softness, certain kind of control. Maybe it's a Fresnel because you can get a good hard cut on it, or various things. Or we used the quasar tubes because we had to get them out of the frame, not up too high, but so they were the right instruments for that.
Those are really cool.
Yeah, they're definitely useful. And So sometimes you want to use a certain fixture, but what you have to do
fixture,
then is
what's the word I was looking for?
Fixture, instrument.
Yeah.
You have to calculate, if you want to shoot at a specific aperture, specific ISO, that sort of stuff, which generally you do on a film. That's another thing that's different from commercial work to some extent. Right. You have to calculate the photometrics of a unit. So you have to know the photometrics are how much light, it's the measurements of the light output. So if I want to shoot at a T4 at, in this area, I know that my key light probably is going to have to hit T4. So then I have to figure out where the key light's going to be, what instrument it is first, where it's going to be, and then say, okay, I can hit a T4 with this light.
What do you even mean by T4?
The f-stop. The
interesting.
Sorry. Yeah,
and that's the universal, like across lenses, the T-stops, right?
T-stops or f-stops. T-stops, f-stops are calculated theoretical numbers.
Yes, and that's because it's because of how apertures work.
Yeah. So, but the optics in any given lens are different from one another, and some lenses will transmit more light or less light than the theoretical f-stop.
Right. Okay.
And sometimes it can be a big difference. It's usually not now, like most lenses that are an f 2.8 or something like a T3. It's not too far off. But some zoom lenses can be very far off. And some older prime lenses can be very far off. So you use the T-stop because it's more accurate.
Right. Which is why I think because I've seen people go after lenses that operate off of those T-stops like way more because they're more valuable. But I guess it's to make everything standard essentially at that point.
Yeah, it's because if you may have two different optical design lenses or two different focal lenses. Both of them could be marked, say, f2. I'm thinking some old, vintage prime cinema lenses.
Yeah.
And the calculated f-stop is 2.8 or f2 on both of them, but the t-stop could be different.
Right.
So if you set the f-stop on one and you're trying to make your exposures consistent, which is really important in narrative work for intercutting and for color timing, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Even though you set the same f-stop on them, you could be a third of a stop different. So that's why I use the T-stops. The T-stops will be marked, and they'll be the accurate light transmission in the lens.
Wow.
And so when you get into editing and you find out that you're doing, you go from a master to a two-shot, and the exposure's changing, or you go from two-shot to singles, and the exposure's changing, it just becomes a real pain in post, in editing. So you really try to nail your exposures so they're as consistent as possible. So that's what the T-stops, it's just a little more accurate, and that's more important in filmmaking.
There's less leeway in how you would reference that, you're saying?
That there's it's just a more accurate way.
Yeah.
So if you're metering, if I were here with my light meter, and I set my exposure to be that, when I change lenses, or when I set the exposure on the lens, it's going to be just more correct than it would be on the f-stop.
It's going to line up with what you measured as I need to be at this T-stop, as opposed to it being like a guessing game.
Not to get off on another side tangent off of that tangent. I was I saw you working with the light meter on set, and I realized, I was like, that seems excessively useful, especially for someone like me who is not able at all to eyeball things whatsoever. Would you recommend using a light meter?
I think, a light meter is, again, especially for narrative work, it's very important that things cut together well.
Yeah.
And by using the light, there are two reasons. One is it's very important that things cut together well. So when you go, and if you're metering different shots, if you're metering for different cameras, all these variables, the meter gives you one consistent thing. So I'd meter here, whatever our key light ends up being, and I would set that as my exposure. If we changed the setup, if we I don't know, we had to go, say, to a single this way, and that light's in the frame, so we have to walk it around a little bit. Well, I'm going to remeter that, and I'm going to adjust the light so that it hits the same exposure.
Right.
Because when I move it, it's going to change the exposure on you most likely. Or if we go to a single, I might decide to soften it more. Now we have to adjust the exposure. I'm going to use my light meter so I can hit that same exposure every time. And that goes back to the consistency, which you really need in post, but it's also because you want a certain look. Right. I want my key light exposure to be a certain thing. Maybe I want to underexpose you a little bit or something like that. The meter gives me a very consistent way of doing that. Just saying, I always want that to be that way.
Interesting.
So,
that's fascinating.
Well, we're at a disadvantage because we can't control our lights very well, which we need to. I think that's a big thing we need to upgrade, is get, at least for key lights, ones that we can control more with dimming and getting different bulbs even. Well, I think, I don't know how you feel about LEDs, but I feel like they're a decent, not a long-term solution, because I know how you feel about the, I forget what it's called, like LEDs versus the more...
you're talking about the color...
real lights. I don't know what
for it.
Yeah,
but the color quality.
Sure.
Which so CRI, TLCI are the measurements for it.
Yeah.
Typically.
Because it seems like it'd be a decent fix for right now to just be able to get more control out of them, and they're not very expensive. You can get they can get very expensive. But you can get
ones.
Cheaper ones that can do a decent job. I've seen, and because with lights like that, I'm way less familiar with when it comes to actual bulbs and stuff, like just way less familiar with how those work. It seems like the LEDs are easier to manipulate and work with.
You're talking about something like an LED panel.
Yeah, like a panel.
That's got a dimmer.
Exactly.
Some of them have color temperature control, that sort of thing. Yeah, that obviously would give you more control over everything. There, a lot of people buy them and then they just point them at the subject.
Right.
Which is, not a pretty way to work.
Right.
Again, it depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes in commercial work, it's just a matter of getting a shot quickly. Well, of course, that's the case in narrative work. Sometimes you have to get the shot quickly. And, you don't have a choice. But yeah, you can certainly do more work. Being able to dim things is very important.
Because when you were talking about exposure, you were like, well, I need to adjust the light's exposure, not the exposure in camera. That's what you want to avoid the most, is changing any in-camera settings to compensate for anything. And it's like, that is a much more favorable way to handle lighting issues like that. Because we'll be shooting on location for someone we're not familiar with, and it's like, well, we have no other choice but to just inconsistently use our camera settings in order to just properly expose things, because we're in an unfavorable lighting situation.
Yeah, and I mean, it's you do hit that stuff where you just kind of have to do what you have to do to make it work, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's all I can say is sometimes you just have to do what you have to do.
Because you were a studio photographer. Well, you still are. Right. And you have a studio photography business. And how long have you been in that business? And I don't want to, and you don't even have to answer that if it's going to make you feel bad. But
too long.
Because I mean, hearing your range of expertise in terms of how much equipment has changed over the years, I'm sure it gives you an edge also to understand fundamentals way better, because you aren't coming up you didn't come up in a digital only kind of time where you can get away with not learning the fundamentals as much in some areas now, because you have, I don't want to call it a crutch, but you have the crutch of digital technology to aid you in a lot of ways you didn't before.
That's very true, because when I learned that light meter was the only way to know.
Yes,
you couldn't see the image. When we were shooting film, you just had to know how to get the correct exposure.
Yeah.
You didn't shoot it and then look at it and you could. Actually, that's how you learned even back then.
Yeah.
Was you'd shoot it, you'd take the film to the lab, you'd get it the next day. A commercial lab would be, they would often run 2 processes a day. If you got it
Would that
in
be
the
like
morning,
the pre-production process? You'd actually shoot a little bit?
Well, we used to test the film because for color balance and test lights.
Right,
same thing. So you'd shoot a color chart, a standardized color chart.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
Because film batches would vary.
Yes.
The color would be a little different. The exposure would, way back, the exposure would often be different from one batch of film to the next. So they'd say it's ISO. Back then it was ASA. And they'd say ASA 100, but you'd open the box in the dark. You'd open the box of film, and there'd be a little paper inside, and they would test it. Kodak or Fuji, wherever you bought it, they would test the batch. And you'd open it up, and it would say ASA 80 instead of 100.
Oh, nice.
And so then you had to, adjust everything you're shooting. You'd have to give it a little more light.
Wow.
A third of a stop more light.
That's fascinating.
To hit any given exposure on it. But back then, to learn lighting, it's the same way you would do now. You would do a lighting setup, kind of say, I think that looks like what I want. You'd take your meter readings, set it up the way you want, shoot the film, take it to the lab, they'd process it, you'd pick it up, and then you'd go and look at it and say, oh, it doesn't quite look like I thought it would look.
Yeah.
And then they'd say, I wonder why. And so you'd start looking at, did I need more fill light? Was it too hard or too soft or the wrong color temperature or anything like that? And then you do it all over again. Of course, now you can just go click, and it's not even click. It's, it's like whatever, and know exactly what you're seeing. And then you can look at the light, which changed drastically now. The color temperature is completely different because we lost the direct sunlight, and we've got more skylight, which is a very high color temperature. Now they match tree in the sky color-wise. And the tree is very softly lit now because it's all skylight. But you look at that, and you can set up your lights here and look at, just look at it right on your camera and understand how to match that. Say, well, why does it look like that now? And so now you go and play with the dials on the lights, and you know what they're doing. Then you can say, oh, that's how I get that effect.
Right.
And the more you look at light, just like look at actual light and why does it look like that?
There definitely are parallels. Like there are ways that you can really hone a skill for lighting and understanding how light operates in space. Like now, even though there are a lot more like digital aids, for lack of a better word, like technology has come such a far way. But I wonder, and I don't know what your 2 cents on this is. Back in the day, like the stuff that you're talking about in terms of like operating with film. There seems to be like a lot on the line when it comes to that. Like you have to take more time. You have to be a little bit more. There's a lot more attention to detail because there has to be. There's nothing else. You're working with a light meter, and if it messes up, then you have to do everything again, essentially. Or if there's like an element that's out of control. With everything that we have now digitally in this age, where we can bring what we shot previewed immediately into a computer and retouch instantly and have another product basically within the same hour. Is there like, not like a loss of quality, but like a loss of that like perfectionism nowadays, and has that directly influenced like what people are getting in terms of like output? It's kind of a broad question. I'm sorry,
but we were just watching Star Trek 4, and you're watching it, and it's all obviously practical because not the explosions, but like this particular scene we're looking at, all that's practical. Well, the green screen, you know what I mean. Well, lighting everything. They're not digitally adding more people in the crowd. A lot of techniques that are just so commonplace now. Like, do you think that it's affected filmmaking in a way that's made people a little more? I don't want to say lazy because it's not, because it's like computer animators are just getting more of the work now, but like in a sense, less cognizant or less careful.
Less tangible, maybe even.
Yeah, and there's a bit of that being lost in the art forms with certain films.
I don't want to sound like a crotchety old guy.
Hey,
no, it's fine.
As long as you don't just go full Martin Scorsese and say that like the Marvel movies aren't movies. Right. You know what I mean?
There's definitely a lost care to things because you don't have to. Like you're saying, it's easy to fix it later. Right. It's not always, of course, people think it is
relatively,
but when you get there, it's a different story. There is a loss of the craft to some extent, I think. That said, I mean, the tools we have now are just stunningly useful. They're so good to have.
Yes.
The quasar tubes.
Yes.
There was, again, back in the day, to do that, you would have to build a strip light, a batten light, a board with a bunch of sockets on it, and put some, and that would be the smallest, narrowest strip you could put up there.
That's crazy.
I have them. I built them. And because that's the only thing you could fit into a certain space, say in a hallway over a doorway or something like that. Now you just get a quasar tube, and then you dial in the color temperature.
Yeah.
Back then you'd have to put gels over it. I shouldn't even say back then, because that's still, in a lot of cases, what, there are a lot of movies you watch that are still lit with lots of tungsten instruments, because LEDs do not look as good as tungsten does, period. It just can't. They're getting really good.
When you have the budget to do all tungsten, and you have the budget to make that look good and everything that entails, which I imagine has a lot more cost involved to make that all work, or at least manpower.
Yeah, depends on the scale.
Yeah.
It's actually, now to do certain things, to do a lot of things, it's actually more expensive to do it with LED than it is to do with tungsten.
Oh, really?
So if you want a nice big soft light to do with LED, you need something like a sky panel that's got enough output to do it. If you want a nice big, 6 by 8 by 12 by frame with, you want a book light, like if you really want soft, nice, even, smooth soft light, you need at the very least something like a sky panel, which is many hundreds of watts of LED. The sky panel rents for hundreds of dollars a day, many hundreds of dollars a day. A bigger sky panel.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the equivalent of Gemini, something like that, that's got the kind of output that you need, so that when you spread it out and you diffuse it through an 8 by, full grid or something like that, you can still hit your T4 or your, whatever it is, T2, whatever you're trying to hit. Right. But you can do that with a tungsten instrument that someone wants to throw away now. They're so cheap to run a tungsten instrument, and you'll get way more power than you could possibly imagine when you're used to working with LED. So it's actually cheaper to work in that respect.
So it even comes down to like an output issue as well. Like the LEDs simply aren't bright enough to achieve that.
Right?
Interesting. That's so funny. I never even would have thought of that as a matter of like power even.
So like the biggest LED that most low budget, I'm not talking about, Hollywood, is say the Aperture 300D, really popular fixture now, really useful light, excellent light. One of the cheapest lights I own that's tungsten puts out double the output of that 300D, easily double.
Wow.
That 2K we used for the sunlight, that was, that's a lot of light.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, it's double what that 300D is. And I have lights that are brighter than that, and they cost nothing to buy.
Well, what do you
relatively?
Of course, right. Compared to the equivalent, rather, yeah.
So,
but you're also talking about people just want to get away from it now, and they want to throw them out. They just want to go the new routes,
Well, but that's the thing. That sky panel is incredibly useful, right? Because you can rig it from the grid, which you conveniently have here.
I know,
sort of.
You saw.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't actually rig from that, but so you hang that sky panel up there, and you get your phone out, and you can dim it remotely, wirelessly. Wow. You can change the color temperature. You can get it to do effects like, okay, now it's suddenly a horror flick, and now we've got the buzzing, the fluorescent tube that's flickering on and off. And it's like, well, it's flickering a little too fast. Let's slow that down. It's a whole other thing to do that with tungsten instruments, because you kind of have to know where you want to be to gel it first. And then if you change your mind and find out that it's, you don't quite have enough output now that you gelled it, well, now you have to go up and hang another instrument. With LEDs, of course, you can just dial that in. So they're immensely useful things. LEDs are amazing. Gimbals are amazing. But the problem I see happening with it is there's a rush to just use it.
Yes.
So now you blow, you want those sky panels, you blow your budget on the sky panels, and now you can't get the camera you really need, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want the latest, greatest 12K camera.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can't get the lights you need or the production design you need,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
all that, you know, so
It's like a give and take almost. Yeah.
I'm not really answering your question.
No, you are.
No,
You're answering every
That's
single
important to
one.
know. It's
and
not
the
just
ones
the
I
yes or
didn't
no.
know I had.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, okay, so then when it comes to lighting, what do you swear by? Whether it be technique or brand or fixture or whatever. I mean, what is the stuff that it's like, these are the tried and true principle, you know, or the tried and true things that I know to be true, and I know will always have my back when it comes to lighting. Like, what are those things? Like I said, equipment wise, technique wise.
Well, it depends. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not answering your question.
No, it's
again.
fine.
If I could only have, I don't know, a couple of things to light with,
Sure.
I would want a 2K Fresnel and a big piece of white muslin, a bed sheet, and I can do an awful lot with that.
Because you can diffuse the light and
I can bounce it. I can shape that.
Yeah.
I can use it hard. I can use it soft. I can shape it either way. It's the most light I can get out of a single circuit in most places.
Wow.
It's always going to work. You know, obviously lamps blow out sometimes.
Yeah.
If I had a lot of money, I would replace that with something like a Sky Panel or a Gemini, because there's even more control. But we're talking about, you know, a 2K that you can pick up used for $100 versus $6,000.
Right. There's a big gap there where
it's a pretty big margin.
Yeah.
Wow. So
that's fascinating.
and that would be the simplest. And then, you know, if I could add on to that, I'd add on some pieces of black foam core.
Why?
Because you can control everything with. I still keep these dollar store pieces of black foam core. They're 20 by 30 inches, and you can scrim, you can shade by knowing, you know, how far close to put it to the light.
It's like absorbing the light. I just bump the table.
Exactly. So you can, you know, I could bring them in and darken the wall at the top now, so that the wall there isn't as bright, you know, so we get a better key light exposure relative to the background.
What do you think, like, in terms of using natural light sources? But that's because that's also light. I mean, you're using reflectors, you're using bounce boards and things like that, mirrors even, which when we got to the natural light for exteriors, that was like a whole new world. I'm not going to lie, didn't even teach that in the film school that I went to. So, you know, because you only think about studio kind of lighting, and then we were doing that, and I was like, oh my God, like there's all this. And this makes so much sense now that I see it being used practically, and I just never would have thought. So, like, do you find that having like just a trusty reflector is good? You know, bounce board is good?
Those, you know, bead board is a really basic item, because you can usually use it to add fill, but sometimes you can use it to. We use the mirrors. We would get a kickback here on somebody, or we use the mirrors to kind of pretend there was a little bit of sunlight streaming through. So we would bring the sunlight's the wrong place while we'd reintroduce it somewhere. And that grip work is lighting. You know, that kind of grip work is overhead frames, negative fill. You know, that's all lighting. Even though it's not something you plug in or put a battery in.
Right.
It's not electric.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's as much lighting, and I see that a lot. There's sort of a certain amount of trickery going on with marketing materials. You'll see companies talk about, oh, we didn't light this. Actually, you'll see that even sometimes on movies, in interviews. He'll be talking about it. We used available light. And, well, they didn't really use available light in the way that most people think is available light.
Yeah.
They didn't just show up there and start shooting.
Yeah.
At the very least, there was planning with the weather, with timing. It's like we can only shoot on these days in this kind of weather.
I remember seeing that in the pre-production stuff. At first, when I saw it before we had ever gone, I was like, why do they have when the sun sets and rises and like all these different times? Like it just seems so, the 180 and how everything was, the direction the sun was going to be going. I'm like, that seems weird. And then we got there and I was like, that is all very useful. Like that's very important.
That's the lighting. That's available light, but knowing when to shoot a certain shot or scene, planning that is the lighting. You know, it's saying the sun's got to be. It's the same thing. If I put the 2K there, or I planned my shot so the sun was there.
Wow,
it's lighting.
What resource do you use where you were able to even know that? A farmer's almanac, or like what?
Well, that's what we used to use something like that. Now there are apps that will just show you where the sun.
What are the apps called?
Interesting. I use one called
that just seems
Lumos.
So useful. Lumos.
It's
very useful.
Incredibly useful.
Yeah.
So you can come to a location like this, and I can say, "Oh, we're going to shoot in here," and we'll be scouting, and I'll just hold up the app, and so at any given time of day, it'll show me where the sun's going to be.
Yeah.
And then I can also plug in. If we're going to shoot next month or something like that, I can put in that date, and of course the sun will be in a different position. So that's really useful. I used to have to carry, what were they called? There's a word for the sun path through the sky. I can't think of it now, but so I would have to carry charts that would show the altitude and the azimuth of the sun path for a given latitude, because it's different everywhere you are on Earth. So I would carry them mostly for local latitudes.
Right.
And so I'd go on location scout and I'd say, okay, here's where the windows are. Then I'd get my compass out, and it was an actual compass then, which I still carry, and say, okay, that's due south. I'd look at my chart and say, okay, the sun will be 30 degrees here at this time of day. And of course, then you had to calculate the difference between daylight savings time and standard time. Now the app does all that for you. So the technology is just amazing. It's wonderful.
I would imagine, especially for that.
I can guarantee you that I would have gotten that wrong if I had to do it that way, for sure. Guarantee.
Well, the first time you showed up at the shoot and found out the sun wasn't where you wanted it to be, would be the last time you'd do that. And then you'd say, how do I figure this out?
Yeah.
And then you'd look it up and find out, I can get a chart and print it out and laminate it, and where you could buy them.
It's like whether by success or by fire, you're going to get it right the next time.
We will figure it out. If you want it to work,
if you care.
Exactly.
But that technology. This goes back to your question before. Is like that technology is just amazing and so useful, and so it just lets us do so much more. The other ones are the apps that will show you your framing for a given sensor and lens. And so you use your phone and or your iPad, and you can look at a frame and say, this will work. We can get in here on a certain focal length without having to back up too far, go to what angle, whatever.
Incredibly useful. What is that app called?
There are a bunch of them. I can't think of the name of it. There's the most popular one right now is called. It will come to me.
No worries.
I hope so.
And you can just, there was one I used for a while by Panavision, and it was a simple one, but it didn't do a lot of things. So, but there are a whole bunch of them. It's easy to download. There are a bunch of free ones which work. Eventually you'll start using them and say, I wish it had this, and then you'll fine tune them. But I still use my old school director's viewfinder, like this. Turn to the focal length, turn to the format, the aspect ratio that you want to shoot at. And I like doing that because it's a completely different sense of what you're looking at when you're framing exactly and you don't see everything else. When you're looking at your phone, you kind of see everything in 3 dimensions. But when you're looking like this, it's a whole other thing. So I still like to use my director's viewfinder.
It's like you just see what you're going to be seeing. You're forcing yourself into that.
Exactly.
Oh, dude, that's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. Because another reason I like that is because I like to think of what focal length I'm going to use for a reason. Like not just can I get this shot by zooming in or out, which is what you do on the app.
Yeah.
Longer, short. Okay, yeah, I can frame that. Interesting. But with the viewfinder, you have to decide the focal. Well, you don't have to, but you set your aspect ratio and you set the focal length. And so, let's say I want to use a 35 here for this. So I set to a 35, and I choose a 35 because of the way it feels. It's the right feel for this particular shot. So I set that, and then I say, aha, okay, well, now we've got a problem because this wall's here. I can't get the camera. Maybe I can get the camera here, but I can't operate the camera because I'm jammed in a corner, which I always get jammed in a corner. Right. And so now you start thinking about what does that mean for the shot? Does that mean, can we just move everything out a little bit? Maybe we can cheat the singles, even though we want to do the two shot here, the master shot here. Well, still want to be on this 35, so we'll just cheat the singles out a little bit. And, those are the things that you...
without even having to bring the rigging and everything. You just know,
definitely.
That's, wow. That's
even
tool.
on the day, you frame it, whether it's with your app or your viewfinder, say, okay, I want to be here, and then your AC can, boom, this is where I need to be.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times that I wish I could have had that for sure.
Where it's just get the app.
Honestly.
The apps are very useful. I mean, I like the viewfinder for those physical reasons.
Are those expensive?
They're a few $100 and up. I have two. I have the Alan Gordon one, which is like $700, but I don't like it as much as the cheaper one because it's weird. The magnification. I have the Burns and Sawyer is the first one I got, and I liked. And then I always wanted the Alan Gordon one because it was fancier and looked like it would be better. And then I finally got one, and it's like, the magnification is lower. So I see a bigger image through the Burns and Sawyer one. So I'm selling the Alan Gordon one now. It's more desirable.
That's so funny.
But
interesting.
I don't like it as much.
The new gear is not always as good as it is as the allure. It doesn't always live up to the hype. It's interesting.
It's, one of you asked earlier about equipment that I like or don't like, whatever. I really am not attached to equipment at all, except in the sense that I think of them as tools. It's, okay, I need to do this thing. I need to light this way, or I need to shoot this frame. What do I need to do that?
Right.
I don't care what name is on it. I don't care how many K the sensor is, unless it's there to serve a purpose.
Yeah.
So, if I know that I'm going to have to rig that light there, and it's once we build the set, it's going to be I'm not going to have access to it for whatever reason. There won't be enough time to. Then I might want a different light for that reason, is because, like the quasar tubes, I know that's going to be a problem for me to. If the daylight color temperature changes, look how completely different the light is now. And in that case, the quasars were the right thing, even though I like tungsten better. Quasars were the perfect tool for that job. And so, like, to me, it really doesn't matter. The camera is the least important thing in my world. Except for its usability.
Director of photography.
So it's the same thing. You might walk into an industrial setting. The same thing. There's going to be maybe a mercury vapor light, and you shoot it, and it's like, oh, gee, why is that blue or green looking? And it's a certain kind of light, and that's falling a certain way. Maybe that's top lighting, and it's falling hard hit here and dark under the eyes, because of its angle. But it's green there, but the light back here is yellow because in the factory those fixtures were put in more recently than these fixtures, so they're different colors, and that's when you get those effects you're talking about. And so they can make sense if they're in the right place for the story. Now, of course, you see a lot of music videos are the obvious place where you'll see lighting that it doesn't have to make sense in the first place. Maybe horror films, you'll see a lot of weird colors for no particular reason. now more than ever. But yeah, there's no reason not to. Same thing, sci-fi stuff. Well, you can justify having a purple light coming from anywhere as long as there's, there are purple lights that run down there. They guide you down the corridor, when the power's out.
Yeah.
That's almost anything. So you're still, when you see that, there should be a reason story-wise. If it pulls you out of the story because it's weird lighting and it doesn't make sense for that lighting to be there, then what was the point? And it's the same way with camera work. You're looking at if the lighting doesn't look like it's supposed to be there, the viewer will, even if they don't really notice it, even if they don't say, "Oh, where's that light coming from?" Most people aren't going to say that, but it registers in your brain. You know something's not right. If you open a door to the outside and it's darker outside than it is inside, I mean, that's an obvious one. But you can sense that something's not right. Like, oh, I thought the sun was still up, that sort of thing. And if you do that in a film and it pulls the viewer out of the story, then you've failed.
Yeah.
If it's that's another thing we try to do is match lighting ratios from the interior to exterior, so they look natural, but you don't blow out the exterior. So it's exposed well enough that you can see things, but not so bright that it's just white or blown out, because that feels wrong. It doesn't look pretty. But you still want it to be brighter than the inside, but you don't want to distract by having it so bright. So that's all lighting stuff to keep you in the story. It's got to feel natural. It's got to feel right. The ratio has to feel right. Sometimes it does need to be darker outside by only a certain amount. Sometimes the red light or the green light needs to be, there, but not too bright. It's just a kiss, just a little edge light there. And it's fun playing with that stuff.
It almost seems like in order to, if you're working with light, it almost seems like the first step is to immerse yourself in the story. I mean, just from what you're saying, because it's not, how do I light this? It's, okay, what makes sense in the context of what we're shooting? And then you start there. You start with, I'm in this world, and then you systematically, logically take steps to achieve the light that makes sense for that story. And what you're saying before about even why are there beams of light in the shot? Well, there's dust in the air because we're in a factory or something like that. Yep. So it almost has to start with immersion. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I do. When I read a script, I usually picture in my mind, just like when you read a book. It's like you can picture the action, what's happening, and there's usually a reason you picture it a certain way. Sometimes it changes after you've read it. You may not realize a point in a story where something changes emotionally at first until you get the whole story. And then you go back and you think about it again and you realize, something's happening here that we need to use our light or use our lenses. There's maybe we want to be farther away at a certain point in the story and closer in a different part of the story for a reason, again, to help tell that. But you picture, you have those visual images in your head when you're reading the story. Wow. But they're not always concrete. Sometimes you have to think of, think, what did I see? What did I picture in my head at that point? Interesting. Is it sunset for a reason? Did it feel warm and cozy, or was it intimidating, or was it scary, or was it, anything like that?
That's fascinating. So even there's even a certain amount of perspective too, because everybody's going to read or watch or consume media from a certain standpoint, and their past experiences are gonna lend themselves to how they perceive what they're reading or taking in. So as someone who creates those things, it's almost like you have a voice in the way you light it, because the way that you're immersing yourself in where you are in that scene. It also is very personal too, because you are a part of that scene now, and your perspective is informing how you're lighting it. So there's you're almost putting yourself a piece of yourself in every shot when you light, because it directly affects that. That's so interesting. Dude, that's
that's how everybody would tell a story. You can take the same script and give it to two different directors, and they'll tell the same story, but they're going to tell it differently. Two cinematographers, same thing. You'll get a cinematographer that feels like this story needs to be shot objectively, and another one wants it subjectively. Feels like the story is told more from afar, as opposed to I don't want to say by one of the characters, but and they'll tell that story differently. They'll make different focal length choices. They'll make different lighting choices. Same way with the actors. Think of how many different Batmans you've seen, or whatever.
Exactly.
They within the story, they play it differently. Okay, he's a dark character or whatever. However the story is, but they'll play that character differently. You're absolutely right. It's
the source material is the same, but the way it's played is wow.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of filmmaking is that all those inputs contribute. You have the director, the actors, the talent, the cinematographer, the production designer, wardrobe, locations, everything. And each one of those people are putting their I don't want to use the word spin, but their feel of what the story is into it, and it's all it comes together into something very unique. That there's no other art form like it. A painter can create beauty, but it's that one person's painting. Even a stage play, is all these pieces that come together. The acting, the directing, the lighting, the music, all that. But there's nothing that's so extensively a collaboration of everybody's
actual artistic vision.
There's nothing like it anywhere. Even a stage play, we can spread it out in front of you, but we can't make a choice of how much you can see or not see. Like you can with cinematography, where I can say, well, I'm only going to show you a single, close up. I'm going to show you this much, and I'm also going to move in at the same time, or maybe I'm not going to move in at the same time. You don't have those choices. I can change things, not me, but the production can change things from shot to shot that you can't do on a stage. And the way you can guide the story, everybody involved in it can guide the story is it's just amazing to me that there is no art form that's like it. Because it just has everything. It has sound and movement and color and all that. So it's a lot of fun to be part of that. Making the story come alive.
Wow.
Dang.
Wow. Wow. JB. An amazingly informational and
inspiring.
And inspiring, kind of like mind opening. I want to say expanding, I guess. It's incredible. And I think I stand by what I said at the top of the show. My opinion hasn't changed. I think you're a brilliant filmmaker, and I think your approach is very, I think it's very fascinating, and I think it's very, I think it has great results.
Thanks. And I do appreciate it.
Yeah. And I could listen to you talk about these things for hours. And I really appreciate you coming out and taking the time to talk to us. I hope you enjoyed in any capacity.
I love talking about lights and lenses.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, no, it's definitely, and it was happening on set all the time. Yeah, any moment that we got, we were like, we should go ask JB a question and talk
thank
to
you
him
for that too, because it was really cool to be able to be a part of a set, but then also after we had wrapped and when everybody was chilling, just being able to go up to you and ask a question and like hierarchically, like I would say like other sets, maybe that's not always the case, not being able to go up to the DP and be like, hi, but I really appreciate it. And you answered a couple of my questions and it was very insightful. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I love to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I love it. And you guys obviously do too. You're interested in what makes it work. So that's great. Yes. Yeah. And it was great having you on set too.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's seriously, it was, you guys were great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And part of, like things would not have happened. We would not have had the shots we had.
Yeah.
And, without your work.
Thank you.
Really,
wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Seriously. Yeah. I would love to work again with you sometime. And, is there anything that you would like to plug or shout out? Your businesses, your anything like that, film projects, anything?
Well, I don't know. Got some news. A feature film I did last year is an official selection at the Toronto Independent Film Festival.
Hey, nice.
Found out about that yesterday. And a short I did is a official selection at the Austin Revolution Film Festival. Awesome. Got some other ones going around that I'm getting tidbits from various people in the productions that are also official selections at other. I guess this is the season, and all the judging will be done soon. So hopefully there will be some good news there.
Yeah,
and I'll be able to release some things. What else? My commercial studio, earlandsedor.com.
Can you spell that?
Yes, EARLANDSEDOR.com is my commercial production studio. We do still photography and video production. And then my personal filmmaking website is jbearl.com. Badly needs to be updated, as we were talking about. My reel is far too old and in need of updating with material, which is also now years old. Someday I'll get to that. And,
that's how it goes.
That's mainly there just for contact, so people can find me. That's what's up. Got a few features in the works and some shorts also in the works. So once we get through the pandemic. Hopefully.
Yeah, for sure.
Right on, dude. That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
thank you so much for taking the time.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Seriously. Awesome. And thank all of you for watching and listening to the Poorly Edited Podcast. You can catch us on YouTube for the video version of the podcast, and you can see the bad lighting for yourself. Also catch us and listen to us, the audio version, on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere else you can get audio files streamed through the internet,
where you can hear the bad lighting.
The bad lighting. This is the Poorly Edited Podcast signing out. Thank you so much. Have a great day.